Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining our diagnostic training session today. Now, if you have any questions throughout the session, if you're watching on Zoom, just look at the top of the bottom of your screen. Wherever your Zoom controls are, you should see a little button that says Q&A. Click on that, type in your question, and I'll get to those at the end of the session. If you're watching on YouTube, just feel free to use the live chat if you're watching it live. Otherwise, feel free to leave a comment, and I'll get to those as I can. So my name is Jason Gabrinas. I'm one of Snap-on's National Diagnostic Technical Trainers. Been in the training department the last 11 years or so, traveling around North America, helping techs and shop owners get the most out of their diagnostic equipment. Before I did that, it was a couple years as a diagnostic sales rep with Snap-on, so I had about 30 different franchisees I worked with, as well as the shops that they serviced, in order to help everyone get the most out of their diagnostic needs. Then before that, it was 8 years at Subaru, so worked in a dealership, and over time, I guess, just kind of became that default diag guy in the shops. I always ended up with the drivability problems, the intermittent problems, the weird wiring problems that would show up on those cars. And that's really where I cut my diagnostic teeth, was trying to figure out all those weird head scratcher type cars that would come into my bay. Then before that, a bunch of other miscellaneous wrenching jobs. Been a little over 25 years under hood experience for me. So our topic today is continuing our OEM specific training series, and today we are talking about Honda. So in a chunk of classes, we'll do 6 weeks worth of classes, right? So we do a domestic, an Asian, and a European make right now. So as of this time, we are talking about Honda today. So let's get going with some history. Talk about where this all started and where we are going to bring us to present day. So this first started. Soichiro Honda was the gentleman's name who started this. Makes sense. I began working as a mechanic tuning race cars. Now, in 1937, he started a company producing piston rings, and that didn't really go that well. He tried to actually partner with Toyota at the time, and they come to find out, well, your piston rings aren't all that great. So he kind of went back and forth, back to the drawing board. Took a lot of lessons from Toyota and how they did things and the Toyota method of doing things, and ended up partnering back together with Toyota throughout World War II. And in 1946, founded the Honda Technical Research Institute. And at that point, began producing motorized bicycles, not quite motorcycles, but they had a bunch, they had about 100 engines laying around, and they would put them on these bicycles, chain drive, and they would be motorized bicycles. They ended up producing their first complete motorcycle in 1949, and they became the largest motorcycle producer by 1964. So less than 25 years, ended up being the largest motorcycle producer. So that's kind of. They produced their first automobile in 1963. Pictured here is the T360 mini pickup truck, one of those little mini Japanese pickup trucks you might see running around. Actually, there's a few of them around my neighborhood that I see just kind of putting around. Not necessarily this one, but the little tiny little pickup trucks there. They ended up launching the Acura brand in 1986. So that's, I think, pretty much North America only. Maybe there's some other areas of the world. That's mainly Honda everywhere else. But Acura is the luxury brand over here. It's very similar platforms to what they use worldwide anyways. In 1991, they released the Acura NSX, which was their first mid-engine V6. And that was one of the first production engines with VTEC, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But it's variable valve timing and lift electronic control is what that stands for. And that's still in use today. Sure, various iterations and improvements over the time. But back in 1991, I remember, my teenage years, that was a big deal back when they came out with that, Fast and the Furious and all that. They ended up reaching 1 million US sales in 1998. And now they produce hybrid electric and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. So really just from gasoline through hybrid, electric, and hydrogen, they kind of cover the board with that. And that's where they'll be going in the future, I'm sure. So we'll talk about some top models sales-wise anyways. This is our sales totals from the last 10 or so years, 2013 to 2023. And we can see, may not be a surprise to you, depending on where you live. There's a lot of Hondas around. You certainly see a lot of CRVs running around on the road. 3.7 million over the 10 years. Closely followed by the Civic, which there's a ton of those on the road. And same thing with Accord. All over 3 million in sales. Now, this is North America. over those years. And then we get down the Pilot, the Odyssey, HRV, and then the MDX and the RDX. Those are the first two Acura makes down here. And we'll see they're around about 500,000, little over 500,000 in sales, and then down all the way down to the TLX with 269,000. So you can see it drops off pretty quickly after these main 3 or 4 makes, or 3 or 4 brands up here, and then it drops off pretty quickly. And we have the Ridgeline down here, the pickup there, 313,000. Overall, over those 10 years, average about 1.4 million, almost 1.5 million vehicles a year, 14,985,000 and change with that. So I'll pick some representative models out of that bulk of the 10 years, and where is kind of the high water mark for those top few models. So 2019 was the high water mark for the CRV there. And that was the 5th generation of the CRV, offered with a 1.5 liter turbo and a 2.4 liter naturally aspirated engine. And those are very similar across the board. Honda is very good at using the same equipment across the product line. So they have a couple different iterations of 4 cylinders, really 1 or 2 iterations of 6 cylinders across the board. And that's pretty much it. They like to keep it very same. Just kind of like Toyota. That's taken a page out of Toyota's playbook, right? The less complexity we have, the more different models we can make with fewer engines. And we'll definitely see that going forward with a couple other brands as well. But Honda's really good at that. CVT transmission is the only one available for this model in this case. 2017 Civic, same idea. The Civic's actually been around since like the 70s. So this is the 10th generation of the Civic in 2017, offered with 1.5 liter and 2 liter naturally aspirated engines. The CVT transmission only. It's based on the Honda Global platform. So round about this generation, as I said, they kind of try and keep the engines the same. Well, they also try and keep the platform the same. So the underneath the carriage there. So this is the Honda Global platform. If you buy a 2017 Civic, no matter where you are in the world, it's going to be the same platform worldwide. Might be left-hand drive or right-hand drive, but that's pretty much your only difference. The suspension is going to be the same. The underpinnings is going to be the same. It is the second best-selling car in North America behind the Toyota Camry, which we already talked about a few episodes ago. And then I've decided to throw an Acura in there. I know it's not one of the top 3, but just to kind of mix it up a little bit. So the 2014 Acura MDX was the high water mark for the MDX there. And that was their highest selling model, as we saw. It is the 3rd generation of the MDX. It was available with the 3.5 liter naturally aspirated engine only. So only a V6, and it can be any V6 you want as long as it's a 3.5 liter, right? And that's pretty much the similar 6-cylinder they'll use across the board. If they're using a 6-cylinder, it's going to be that one. And 6-speed automatic transmission was the only option, not a CVT in that case, and no manual transmission option there as well. And as we can see, that's pretty much par for the course across the industry. Very few stick shift transmissions around anymore. Pretty much they're going to automatics or CVTs. So some common issues as we look into it. Now, I will say Honda as a brand, and I'd say comparable to Toyota, they're very, very reliable, right? Not a lot of massive breakdowns, as it were, if they are going to have any issues. Generally, what we're seeing, at least with the data coming out, is going to be valve train issues. A lot of it due to VTEC, because that's oil controlled. We got the oil control valve there pictured on the right. So a lot of the variable valve timing, variable valve lift type systems that they have in there, it's going to be valve train related. And it's not always going to be electrical necessarily. It could just be low on oil or poor maintenance. That usually comes up a lot on VVT on pretty much any brand. But as I said, fairly reliable. Catalytic converter problems, evap issues. I think that's kind of standard in the industry as well, just because of how lean we're running the cars for the cat problems and then the evap issues. That's just it's very closely monitored. So you're going to get a lot of evap codes between leaks and electrical problems there as well. So not a lot of weird off the wall, unusual issues, I don't think, for this brand, but that is what we're going to see, especially since VTEC is kind of their thing across the board, right? And we'll see that when we get into common codes. So common codes is the top 10 out of the top, I think, 3,500 codes we have that show up in the scan tool. And it's VPS stuck off bank 1, so that's going to be for the variable valve timing. Once again, down here, VTEC system malfunction, cam position sensor range and performance. So that's kind of related to the valve train as well. That they're pretty sensitive with that. Cam sensor circuit intermittent, catalyst efficiency, catalyst efficiency, catalyst efficiency. So like I said, it kind of plays out valve train issues, cam sensor issues, and then the catalyst efficiency for sure, right? And we'll see it's really only a couple different engines that show up as far as those high number of codes occurring, and a lot of CRVs, which plays out with the data as well, right? So it's a very popular model. And then the 2.4 liter engine is a very popular engine. So that just stands to reason that we would have those types of issues in. So as far as OEM specific features, is going to be a lot to do with the valve train, right? So, like I said, back in 1991, they kind of launched this VTEC thing, and this was their patented improvement for changing valve lift somewhat dynamically. So the big now, this isn't to say that other manufacturers haven't also got on board with changing valve lift and valve timing and things, but what VTEC really did for the industry was introduce that into the industry. So we have two sets of cam lobes. So we have a low lift cam lobes on two sides, and then we have a high lift cam lobe in the middle. And by using oil pressure in conjunction with our rockers and our pins, which operate off oil pressure, it will ride on the camshaft. And depending on how these pins are locked in, will dictate which camshaft lobe it follows. So either it follows the low camshaft or it follows the high camshaft, depending on how that pin is set up. So you can see there's some springs and some washers in there. We got 3 rockers kind of in a set, and then a spring-loaded piston with some other pistons that go in between and kind of lock the camshafts together. It's controlled by the oil control valve. So based on where that valve is, either high or low or wherever, it's going to dictate where that oil pressure goes as far as those rockers. So it's gonna also have a pressure switch on USA and Canada as well, and then it's got the solenoid that opens and closes. Depending on, it's going to open and close this control valve, depending on where it needs to be. So if we take a look at the low cam lift, this would be kind of normal operation, I guess you would say. This return spring is going to hold that pin, so the breaks in between the pieces of the pins are going to line up with the center rocker. So really, these outer rockers are going to follow the camshaft, and this just kind of floats in space. That medium rocker arm in there in the middle, just going to kind of float there and not follow along with the camshaft, the high lobe cam. So the low lift cams will be riding on the rockers and pushing down on the valves. It's overhead cam, right? And it's going to push down on the valves. There is just going to open them however the low cam sees fit. Then when it needs to operate the VTEC system and go to switch to the high lift cam, this will open up. The solenoid will open up. It'll feed oil pressure in here and push against the return spring, which then you see it moves those brakes across, locking all those rockers together. And then it will follow the high lift cam in the middle and then force these other 2 rockers to push down. You can see how it kind of it's going to follow that cam in the middle and then push down on those. So we really get a high or a low lift cam. It's not really variable like we saw with BMW. But it's kind of a all or nothing proposition. You're going to either have just kind of regular operation or high lift operation. And that's how it works even to this day. I mean, there might be small variances and improvements, but hey, if it works, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Another thing that Honda does, and it's not that they are the only ones who do it, but they do it in kind of a unique way, is going to be displacement on demand. We saw this with GM a couple weeks back as well. They do it a little bit differently. Honda does it working off of oil pressure again. So we have another solenoid that controls oil pressure. So we're going to have 6 cylinders. We can do either a low lift mode or a high lift mode, which would be the VTEC operation. And then also you can operate in a 3-cylinder mode. So only 3 of the cylinders will fire and then the other 3 get shut off. So this works once again along with the rocker arms. So kind of a variation or a riff on VTEC. But it's also using primary and secondary rocker arms with return springs and with the pins. So it will lock the pins in place in order for everybody to kind of open and close and do what they need to do. This is normal operation, right? Under 6-cylinder operation. Then we can take it down to 4-cylinder operation, depending on which oil passages we open up. You can see that we have this spring here, and this spring here is being pushed back. So, and this spring is being pushed back. So this cylinder is being pushed back, and it'll be like the front cylinders, maybe the back cylinders. 2 of the cylinders on one end will shut off. It'll basically it'll close the valves entirely, and with the other one still being operated. And then on 3-cylinder operation, it's going to push all the pins back on one side, and then so it only runs on half the engine. So on a V6, it's going to run on 3 cylinders on one bank. The other bank will be completely shut off with the no rocker, and the rocker arms are just kind of sitting there in space, just kind of floating along. Now let's go for tips from a tech. So as I said, fairly reliable vehicles, so not a lot of weird things happen. This is what I'm kind of looking for in this tips for a tech set from a tech section. It's, hey, I have seen this really strange occurrence on this particular engine, and 9 times out of 10, this is the fix for it. So in this case, this is kind of a system-wide issue, and this came up, I've experienced this myself, when you clear the codes in the ABS system. Now, this could be very well, you're going to just do a clear all codes in the system, right? You press the one button, clears all the codes, and then you will end up with a VSA light on. So VSA is going to be vehicle stability. Vehicle stability assist, I think is what the A stands for. Text and field report VSA light will stay on and may also have a code 84 stored after replacing the ABS or VSA modulator, clearing stored system DTCs, or after performing brake repairs. So clearing the DTCs, that would be if I did a code clear, plus it could be the other issues. The VSA sensor neutral memorization procedure must be completed after the modulator assembly is replaced, clearing codes, or completing brake-related repairs that may have caused the light to come on. So this is actually inside our troubleshooter. Inside the scan tool, you can actually find this inside troubleshooter. And it says the procedure to clear it is outlined in test and procedures under test apart. So if we go in there, it says ABS will start performing a self-test when the key is switched to the on position, key on, engine off. After the engine is started and the driver accelerates above 6 miles an hour, the ABS pump will cycle for about 1 second. So don't freak out if you hear the ABS pump cycle. Noise is going to be reported as a buzz or a moan. It's going to be kind of like that. After a self-test is completed, the ABS light will turn off. So that's all we need to do. It just needs to go through a self-test in order for it to turn that light off. So no matter what you do, you can clear the codes as many times as you want. That light's going to stay on until you perform that self-test. So just make sure you're performing the self-test if you have that issue. Happens tons of times. I would venture to guess, I actually never asked, but I would venture to guess we get quite a few calls on that into our customer care center as well. So the simple fix, just go in, drive the car a few feet. Once it gets over 6 miles an hour, it'll cycle, and that should take care of the ABS light for you. All right, let's go to OEM Specific Functions. That's what I meant to say. So as far as engine-related tests, when I go into the scan tool, what kind of functional tests can I see? Like I said, not a lot of complexity with these until it comes to like the VTEC system or the VTC. So there's going to be VTEC and VTC specific tests that are in there that it'll run through. I just need to make sure you follow the proper procedures in there. In this case, the VTC test will activate the VTC valve to 3 stages and monitors each position from input voltage to cam sensor input against target angle commanded by ECM and PCM. So that's the variable timing control. There can be a difference between actual angle and a target of 3 to 5 degrees. The purpose of this test is to duplicate a VTC system failure of P0011. It will not execute if there's any code set. And then you need to make sure that the certain parameters are met. But this will simulate a failure in the system to make sure that the system's actually working. So it'll do a test. Also, crank position pattern learning needs to be done after the fact as well. So when I do any cam and crank system relearn or repairs, I need to do a relearn as well. So there's a crank pattern learn in there. Transmission related tests, like I said, there's a whole slew of CVTs that are out there. I think it's pretty much the same CVT, but CVT learn value reset. So as a lot of transmissions nowadays, they learn driving patterns and driving styles. If you do any work with the TCM, the valve body, or any other transmission work, you would need to do this learning value reset. Other random tests that are available as well that would be semi-specific to the vehicle would be brake pad maintenance mode, right? That's A lot of vehicles across the industry have that, but that is it's an important one. And another one that's interesting, if you do any ADAS work, is you can do either a static or a dynamic camera aim. So it used to be it was just static, you had the targets, but there's also a dynamic test that is available in there now as well. So you can actually go through, follow the instructions on how to do that, and it'll walk you through a dynamic test where I don't need a distance, I don't need targets, I can just drive the thing down. So that's a nice improvement there as well. Also, I would be remiss as I was doing research through this course that they are coming out with a fuel cell vehicle next year. And honestly, talking to other people in the industry, about where we think this whole hybrid EV, what have you, phase of the industry is going, I think it's going to end up heading this way, right? A lot of hybrids you're going to see out there. This is kind of a best of all worlds. So this is a plug-in fuel cell hybrid electric vehicle. So you see we got the plug right there. So you can plug it in and operate it off the battery around town situations. If I need to go out for longer distances or I need to charge the battery, it will turn the engine on. Now the engine doesn't run off of gasoline, it runs off of hydrogen. So there's a hydrogen fuel cell that will power the engine. And then the engine, what's the emissions on a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle? It's just water. Right. So it's a lot cleaner. And then we can still have the access to the plug-in to the battery as well. So I think maybe that's where the industry will go, because I know Honda's looking at fuel cell vehicles as well. I know we all understand there are some shortcomings with strict EVs. I think it's going to be some sort of a hybrid solution. Now, this isn't really the class where we're going to talk about that, but I just thought that was interesting that came up during my research. And I had known, prior to that they do have another fuel cell vehicle that's actually been discontinued. It was the Honda Clarity, right? So 69 miles per gallon city, 67 highway, right? The 17 Honda Clarity in that, and that is a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle that runs off of that. And actually, there is support for that inside the scan tool. So that's the first thing I want to look at when we go live, right? Let's just take a quick look at the functions in the scan tool here, as far as that Honda Clarity to start, and then the other vehicles as we. Oops, this must have restarted on. Hold on a second. Okay, so let's take a look first, as I said, on the Honda Clarity there. So we'll go the 2017 Clarity. And you may or may not have known that we actually have scanner functions on this vehicle. Because if you think about it, other than the engine and the fuel system, it's a normal Honda underneath. It's going to have analog brakes and airbags and parking centers and keyless and body units and so on. But if I come down here to my hybrid / electric / I guess, hydrogen vehicle, there's a fuel cell, battery monitor control module. If I go into the fuel cell, there's actually functional tests available, high voltage battery fan test, DT electric water pump test, cooling fan test in there. As far as adjustments, coolant air bleeding. So, of course, there's going to be coolant for the fuel cell or the battery anyways, not necessarily the fuel cell, but the battery. You're going to need to bleed the coolant out of it, right? So anytime you do a coolant work on that, you're going to have to do that. Let's see what we got for data in here. Fuel cell electric water pumps, H2 injectors, cathodes, anodes, catch tanks, etc. So good deal of data when it comes to just the fuel cell as well. So kind of interesting that we do have the support for that. I just thought that was kind of cool. Alternative fuel vehicles, you'll still be able to work on it. All right, let's get to our not so alternative fuel vehicles, though. We'll start with our CRV. And let's see what we have available in Scanner here. All right, so if I were to go into, say, like engine and different special functions that are in there. So it's good. That makes us wait 5 seconds to pull the list. Certain hybrid vehicles need to be put in maintenance mode to do this. But things like crank pattern learning, we talked about that. Throttle position learning, if I need to change my throttle body, we need to do that. Idle stop start counters, eco assist drive, uh, replace ECM, change the alcohol content if I'm running like ethanol in it on a flex fuel vehicle. Functional tests, I gotta wait 10 seconds to get in functional tests. Good time to have some water. All right, and then in this case, we get the VTC test and then the VTEC test that I talked about earlier, plus, injector ons off, electronic throttle control system, etc. Let's go into our SHTrack information and take a look at what are we seeing out there in the real world as far as repairs. Now, this is, of course, engine specific, as I've said many, many times before. So in this case, 2019 Honda CR-V, 2.4-liter engine, 176,000 repairs in our database. And if we look top 10 components, nothing really jumps out at me in this one. Pads and rotors are going to be common. Batteries going to be common. Wheels, I guess. Valve stems go with the wheels. TPMS, I guess maybe that's kind of high for a 5-year-old vehicle. Calipers, starter motor, maybe a little high. But then if we look over at the codes, right? EVAP, like I said, EVAP. Then we get crank position sensor, misfire, lean. A lot of fairly standard codes. Knock sensors, that seems a little high. So maybe they just got a kind of a run on knock sensors. I know we had a similar problem at Subaru, but PO328 knock sensor high, EVAP. But not a lot of occurrences of codes. Like I said, very reliable vehicles kind of as a brand overall. Engine doesn't start, noise heard from brakes, AC and op, right? So those are fairly common things as well. And then if we go to top search looks up, resetting the oil life monitor, brake rotors, TPMS, transmission fluid, fairly common run-of-the-mill stuff there as well. So as I said, very reliable. If anybody ever asks me what kind of car that they should buy if they want something reliable, it's usually Hondas and Toyota. Usually what I recommend, just because they are very reliable. And I think that plays out in the data here, right? So if I pull up this other 1.5-liter engine, that is not a very common engine. 167 repairs. Let me pull up the other 1.5. I think that was an options, right? No, it's options. Change to this engine code. All right, there we go. That's a lot more. 90,000 repairs. Wheels and tires. That all that stuff's going to be pretty much the same. This is going to be engine specific over here. So things like EVAP, once again, misfires, a lot of misfires on that 1.5-liter. System too rich, cam position. All right, so that kind of plays out along what we were saying, right? All right, let's go to our Civic, and you will find that that's going to be fairly similar. It's going to have the same exact scanner functions in there. Like I said, not a lot of differences between the different engines on the platform. They try to keep it very, very same across the board, so they don't have to do a lot of different retooling and things like that. I even think maybe Honda's a little more with that than even Toyota is. So 23,000 repairs on this 1.5-liter engine, and we can see EVAP, lean, turbocharger boost control, because that's the turbocharged variant. Misfires, a lot of those. Transmission fluids, number one over here. AC and op on that. So maybe there's some yeah, look at that. So AC and op there. And then we see AC refrigerant in the top 5 over here. So maybe there's some air conditioning issues with that particular model. Let's change my engine. 2-liter. 2-liter, 111,000 repairs. So a lot more repairs available on that. So it's obviously a lot more common. Number one, EVAP again. A lot of misfires, EVAP. Turbine speed sensor, that's not transmission, but there's only 19 occurrences of that. Once again, low counts on the codes. Not a lot of codes when it comes to Honda. AC refrigerant, AC and up, that's going to follow because that follows the body, not really the engine. And then very similar occurrences over there. And then the last one we'll look at is the MDX. So that uses the 6-cylinder, 3.5-liter 6-cylinder they use. Let's see how that goes. There is going to be a small difference between the base and the super handling all-wheel drive. I'm just going to do the all-wheel drive. 55,528. But if I go to the base model, 55,625. So it's a few more repairs on that one versus the super handling. Pads and rotors, wheels, spark plugs, struts. That seems kind of high. Throttle actuator. That's the first time we've seen that one. But cat, rocker arm actuator. Once again, you're getting into VTEC. It seems like a lot of issues with the VTEC and the rocker arms. More on the 6-cylinders than on the 4-cylinders. Maybe it's just because there's a lot more complexity involved there. System too lean, torque management feedback, evap. Engine does not start, brakes vibrate. That's a lot of common stuff there. Timing belt, transmission fluid, firing order. A lot of that's fairly common. Struts up there again. So maybe there's some suspension issues with those. That could be stabilizer bar link. Those get a pretty high failure rate anyways, but you can kind of see across the board. Here's some things that we would expect. And like I said, Honda as a brand, generally pretty reliable, right? So hopefully we picked up a few little tips and tricks. I know definitely that ABS light code thing, that's pretty big call driver, I think. So hopefully we picked up some more tips and tricks on the Honda vehicles, and that is Honda for this week. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about next week. So next week we are going to ABS systems. Now I know we have covered in the past, in the far past, we've covered speed sensors, but there's other parts to the ABS system, and ABS systems don't necessarily work the way they used to work when they first came into fashion. So we'll talk more about the modern aspects of the ABS systems, how they kind of work with variable, work along with ADAS and work along with like maybe stability control and things like that. So we'll talk about the different ways that they're set up, the different components of the system, how we're going to test them, how we're going to repair them. Hopefully you'll join me next week, same time as always, 6 and 9 Eastern every Tuesday. If you want to join on Zoom, go to snapon.com/OT. You can register there. Otherwise, the 6 p.m. class goes live to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/snapon-diagnostics. If you are watching on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe and check us out over there. The 9 p.m. Eastern class goes live to my Facebook page. So it's facebook.com/snaponjason. If you want to see any of the other topics in this series, I actually have to start adding a third column to this. There's just so much material out there. Anything from ADAS to air conditioning and everything in between. If you go to our YouTube channel, it's youtube.com/snapon-diagnostics. There is a playlist for live training available. If you scan that QR code, it will automatically bring you there and subscribe you. So that'll be pretty helpful there. So feel free to pause the video after the fact and take a quick snap of that. Once again, they're all free. They're all about half hour, 40 minutes, depending. And who else does this amount of free training readily available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, on our YouTube channel. So pretty exciting. Now let's get to questions. If you did join late on Zoom and you do have a question, just find that Q&A button, click on that, and get in there. Otherwise, on YouTube, feel free to use the live chat function as well. Also want to give you a reminder, my buddy Keith does live training as well for new product training. So this is for Zeus and Zeus Plus on Wednesday, and then Apollo and Triton Tools on Thursday. So he takes you everything pretty much from soup to nuts, from setup functions. Let's set up your Wi-Fi, talk about Snap-on Cloud, talk about Security Link, all the way through code to completion, scan tool side of things on scan tool side of things on SHTrack Intelligent Diagnostics, code to completion. Then he takes a little break, about 5 minutes in between. That's about an hour, by the way, for the first part. Takes about a 5-minute break. Then after that goes through guided component tests, scope, meter functions, all that different stuff. So it is YouTube only. I mean, not YouTube only. Boy, I'm just not talking well tonight. It is Zoom only. So snapon.com/OT to register for that. And then you can go in and follow along with Keith as he goes along on his scan tool. You can follow along on your scan tool. Also ask any questions that you need to have answered. So one time a night, 7:30 Eastern, 6:30 Central, 4:30 Pacific. Go sign up. snapon.com/OT. All right, let's get the questions. Looks like we're clear on Zoom. Got a couple on YouTube. Nick's checking in from the UK. I know it's late over there. Back to 11 o'clock, though, so that's nice. The time change happened. So glad you could join us there. He said he can't wait for the next training as well. Let's see. So Claude says you mentioned service mode. Can you suggest a scan tool or shop key, an easy way to find the information for different vehicles, or put a reminder in the scan tool? So it's going to be fairly various depending on the make and the model. I know the fact that I talked about it in Honda was dealing with just their hybrid vehicles. So to get the engine to even turn on to do the functional test, you have to put it in a service mode. I think probably the most reliable way to check is to just see if there is a service mode available in the scan tool when you hook up to the car, because you can't really check it otherwise. Also in shop key, there should be maybe an after repair, I guess would be a good section for that to check and see if there is a, if they say if the manufacturer says you need to put it in a service mode in order to service it there. I guess those two best places you can check between shop key and the scan tool there. So hopefully that answers your question, Claude. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for your question. We got a question in Zoom. Keith says, great job. Thank you very much, Keith. Glad you enjoyed it. I know you like this OEM specific series, so hopefully we can continue on. We're going to run out of brands eventually, but I'm sure this will take us clear through the end of the year. Maybe we'll have a few more next year we'll be able to do as well. So it's been a pretty good series, a lot of good feedback on it. So hopefully you, as the viewer, enjoy it as well. So thank you very much for that. Let's see. And with that, good segue to thank you very much. Thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your day. Spend a little bit of time with me. Hopefully we learned a little bit more about Honda vehicles if we don't necessarily work on them all that often, and a few little tips and tricks and different things that we can think about when it comes to working on Hondas. Hopefully I can see you next week for our ABS systems, modern ABS systems. So with that, enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy your weekend. Have a good night and take care.